This video is being sponsored by the Ides of March. More about this event later on in the video. What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and welcome back to another episode of the best armies in Warhammer 40k. This is the weekly video series where we go through undefeated results from the last weekend in 40k and talk about which armies are currently dominating the competitive metagame. This episode is for the weekend of January 25th and 26th, 2025, and this is going to be a relatively shorter episode. We didn't see too many GTs go down this weekend, although I will throw a caveat out there. The largest event of the weekend, Uprising Adelaide down in Australia, one of the largest events in Australia, an almost 200 player major, is currently ongoing at the time of recording this video. There are still 2 rounds remaining in that event, so it's not going to finish until the wee hours of the morning over here in the US. But if you want to hear me talk about Uprising Adelaide, stay tuned to the channel later this week because I will be discussing the results of that event later on. So with that, let's get into a bit of a metagame breakdown. We saw a good showing this week from Chaos Space Marines, both at the Schwarzwald GT as well as the Battleborn Open, although I will mention that the Battleborn Open was a smaller event, around 20 players, and did end with an X and 1 at the top spot. Still won the event, but not technically undefeated. A lot of Space Marines doing fairly well this week, both Ultramarines and Blood Angels. Ultramarines taking down the Hydra GT as well as the Ginger Odin GT. What a name for an event, I like that one. Blood Angels also at the Schwarzwald GT and taking down the Winchester GT. Both Orks and Astra Militarum saw success at the Rose City Rampage. Adeptus Mechanicus also saw an undefeated result at the Winchester GT using their new Halo Screed Battle Clade detachment. And World Eaters took down the Hive City Gaming GT. And last but certainly not least, the Emperor's Elites Adeptus Custodes undefeated at CastleCon. Now, if we're looking for 40k content this week, the aforementioned tournament Uprising Adelaide is being streamed by our friends over at the Australis Tabletop Gaming Network. Many of the live streams this week are actually offline thanks to all of the coverage we got last week from the Las Vegas Open. However, those guys are doing their part and streaming the biggest event down there in Australia. So if you want to watch some games from the weekend, you can go check them out. Any other streams were live this week, let me know down in the comment section so we can get some eyes on their content. So with that, let's go ahead and duck into these lists, starting at the top with Chaos Space Marines. But first, sponsor time. The Ides of March are approaching, and you should beware of missing the Ides of March GT held by Treasure Trove Keep on March 8th through 9th, 2025. This is the second year that the Ides of March Grand Tournament will be running, and if you are just hearing about it for the first time ever, it is a 100-player GT held up in Rockport, Maine. The event is held at the Samoset Resort, an absolutely gorgeous location, taken from me as someone who was there last year. Oh my god. The location is incredible. You get wonderful views and beautiful weather while you're playing some Warhammer 40k. In addition to a 5-round Warhammer 40k GT, there is also a 100-player AOS event if you're more of a fantasy connoisseur. There is also the Ides of March Golden Brush painting competition that is judged by none other than Goobertown Hobbies. So if you don't want to be a goober yourself, you should head on over to treasuretrovekeep.com/Ides of March 2025 and go get yourself a ticket. I'll also be there at the event live streaming, so you can catch coverage of it here on the channel, but really I would rather see you on camera in person at the tournament. So get your tickets today and I'll see you there. We're starting over here in Germany for the Schwarzwald GT. William Furyman went undefeated with the faction, taking a Renegade Raiders detachment to a 5-0 result. This list included a Chaos Lord with Dread Reaver to give him rerolls when near the opposing deployment zone, Cypher, as well as Fabius Bile. We also saw 2 Cultist Mobs for utility, as well as 2 units of 5 Legionaries, 2 individual Chaos Rhinos to carry some of that infantry around, 2 units of Chaos Bikers to act as fast onboard utility, 5 total Chaos Predators. This included included 2 Predator Annihilators and 3 Predator Destructors. That's really interesting because we haven't really seen the Predator Annihilators see play very much since their recent update. They did get that improved reroll on their damage rolls, which is very nice, and they are a little bit less expensive than the higher attack volume Predator Destructor. Not to mention the fact that they do have incredible synergy not only with Dark Pacts for sustained hits potentially from Chaos Space Marines, but also the additional AP from Renegade Raiders, which makes them able to trade up above their 130 point cost quite a bit into a wide variety of enemy heavy vehicles. We also see a big unit of Chosen, likely for our Chaos Lord to attach into, although that's also not a terrible place for Fabius Bile, although reasonably he doesn't usually see attachment into many units, at least more than 5 Legionaries inside lists outside of Failhammer Siege Host or Creations of Bile, for example. But you could put him in here if you want the statistical improvement to the Chosen, although the Chaos Lord doesn't really need to attach into Legionary squads in this detachment because he's getting his rerolls typically when he's playing aggressively thanks to Dread Reaper. We also then have a little bit of infantry sweeping from a Warp Talon unit as well as a Raptor squad. Overall, pretty interesting to see this Predator play. This isn't really something that we've seen in the past. A lot of times these Renegade Raiders lists will split their focus between Predators and heavier vehicles like Vindicators, for example, but the higher volume of Predators lets us take additional vehicles on the table, so we're really spamming out hulls here. We do have those 5 tanks plus the 2 Chaos Rhinos as well for a total of 7 of these chassis running up the table at you. And given the fact that Renegade Raiders can kind of buff every single attack in the faction as long as you're gaining that +1 AP from the detachment ability, we don't really need to focus our efforts on individual large units. We can get just as much work out of Predators in a higher volume. So that's a really interesting place for this detachment to sit. We don't really see any of the traditional support for them either. Sometimes we see things like Hellbrutes or Abaddon the Despoiler to give them hit rerolls and benefit from multiple Dark Pacts, but we're not doing that today. We're just taking as many of them as possible, and that's a really interesting place. So pretty cool to see Renegade Raiders doing well, especially in the rash of Creations of Bile that we've been seeing more recently. So it's cool to see a different detachment doing well for Chaos Space Marines, and especially given the fact that they have 2 top GT results this week, we are maybe seeing a little bit of a resurgence of this army. Now with that, we're going to move over to Denmark and discuss the Hydra GT. This is because we're going to move over to our loyalist compatriots to the Chaos Space Marines, and in this case, Ultramarines. The event was taken down by Michael Hansen, running an Ultramarine Ironstorm Spearhead. Now, one thing it's interesting to me is that we haven't really seen too much emphasis put on Ironstorm Spearhead since the updates to Space Marines came out. This was theorized by a lot of players to be one of the better builds out of Space Marines when they got their +1 to wound update in the most recent balanced data slate. But we didn't see too much play. It did take down a couple of GTs, but a lot of times it's been overshadowed by things like Vanguard Spearhead instead. But obviously Michael Hansen here is making it work. We have a combi weapon lieutenant with Master of Machine War, so that's going to allow a vehicle to fall back or advance and shoot. He also has Lone Operative, so he can stand next to Robute Gilliman and give Gilliman Lone Operative as well, although we don't see Marnius Calgar in this list, so we aren't taking the, the dynamic duo of Ultramarine characters. Sometimes it's a triumvirate if you include Uriel Ventress in there, but I guess today Robute Gilliman's just a singleton over here as an epic hero. However, he can also get that Lone Operative from Tech Marines. Tech Marines can kind of chain Lone Operative off of vehicles, since they'll get it next to a vehicle and then also grant it to Robute Gilliman. So there's a lot of ways to give him Lone Op while also keeping the rest of the army safe. But generally speaking, Gilliman is going to be standing inside the vehicle brick to project his CP discount aura. That's exactly where this combi lieutenant wants to be standing as well, in order to target vehicles at the start of your turn to give them the Master of the Machine War buff, so he's already going to be in a similar spot to where Gilliman is. We then also see 2 Tech Marines in here, one with Target Augury Web to grant lethal hits, and one with Adept of the Omnissiah to blank incoming damage on vehicles. This is the true triumvirate, that is a true triumvirate of really powerful enhancements in Ironstorm Spearhead that for the longest time were making this detachment unreasonably powerful, especially compared to a lot of the other detachments in the game. And as such, they did get successive nerfs a couple months ago in data slate updates. So we very rarely see all 3 of these enhancements reinforcements all taken at once. A lot of times you'll leave one or two of them at home and just bring one or two by itself. Oftentimes it's Master of Machine War that wins out on that comparison. But today we're bringing all of them. That's going to bank up an Intercessor squad for some OBSEC and backline objective holding, an Infiltrator squad to screen out the brick from enemy deep strikers, 2 Scout squads in a Calidus Assassin for some additional utility, and then a bunch of heavy vehicles. This includes 2 Brutalis Dreadnoughts, 2 Redemptor Dreadnoughts, and a Repulsor Executioner. We can even play a little bit of transport game as well with the Repulsor Executioner, potentially hopping in and carrying around those Intercessors in order to OBSEC centerboard objectives in addition to your backline objectives, which can be pretty useful towards the sort of mid to late game. But otherwise, we're just focusing on this really hefty front line of vehicles. We have a T12 Repulsor Executioner plus the 2 Redemptor Dreadnoughts with their baked-in damage reduction. If you attach that onto the Adept of the Omnissiah as well, those Redemptor Dreadnoughts get super tough to kill. And even if you're going to bring them low on wounds, obviously the Tech Marines can repair them, but you can also do things like reactive fire in the detachment, and so just get additional value out of your Oaths of Moment and get additional shots out of those pretty powerful Redemptor Dreadnought profiles. It's also worth mentioning as well that the Macroplasma Incinerators on the Redemptor Dreadnoughts are particularly affected by Oaths of Moment. They typically wound a lot of heavy targets on 5s, and even lighter stuff they often wound on 3s. So getting +1 to wound against your Oath target and potentially 2 Oath targets thanks to Rabute Gilliman is a big bonus for these Redemptor Dreadnoughts. So that's going to be a big part of this list and a big reason that these Ironstorm Spearhead lists are pretty effective. So it's cool to see this build for Ultramarines on the tabletop. Obviously a little bit more interesting than the standard Gladius Task Forces or the Vanguard Spearheads that we've been seeing from other competitive players more often. So it's nice to talk about something that's a little different. From there, we're going to move on over to Great Britain and discuss the Winchester GT. This was a 41-player GT. It was won by Blood Angels, but we also saw an undefeated result from Adeptus Mechanicus that we'll discuss momentarily. So Nicholas Willingdale is the first player that we're going to be discussing here, running Blood Angels in a Liberator Assault group. Now, this is dirty Blood Angels, so we are running no Blood Angels specific units in the army whatsoever. So this list is going to benefit from the +1 to wound the Codex compliant Space Marines are gaining access to, because we don't have any Blood Angels specific units inside. Now, whether or not you agree that that is the correct way that the rules should be played, that is obviously the rules as written. And I guess the open question is whether or not it is too strong for Blood Angels, who we have been seeing put up some pretty solid results more recently. They did have another undefeated result at this Forgefall GT this week, although that was with a classic Blood Angels list. So it definitely seems like there are multiple ways to play the faction. So this list is running a Captain with Speed of the Primarch. Interestingly, no Rage-Fueled Warrior today. We are playing Liberator Assault Group, but we don't have that Sustained Hits 3 enhancement on our Captain, so he doesn't have that once per game super amp of 1 trillion extra damage, which, to be fair, he doesn't often need, because a lot of times he's killing whatever he gets into combat with anyway. He doesn't really need the extreme additional damage. However, Speed of the Primarch is interesting because it does give you that once per game use of Fight First, so we can come in and eat a reactive attack or potentially heroically intervene into an awkward position and then use that ability to fight first, especially if we're playing it aggressively otherwise. Now, in addition, we're kind of compounding that fights first with a Judiciar as well. He obviously will give his unit fight first when he is joined in, and he's taken the Gift of Foresight enhancement. This is going to hit for battle round, allow you to auto 6 one of his hit, wound, or saving throws for that Judiciar. Not his unit, just himself. However, he gets an invulnerable save once he's in melee, so he's a little sticky to kill, especially with an auto 6 sticking in there. And he also has a devastating weapon. So if you're using that attack aggressively, offensively, he can also guarantee some mortal wounds on his target, which is incredibly useful for that guy because he wants to be able to come in and clear enemy characters with an auto 6 and then improve his attacks in the future. Now, in order to attach these guys, we do have a trio of Assault Intercessor squads, so we can be getting those situational rerolls on those characters. We have an Impulsor to carry one of them into the fight, as well as 3 units of 5 Assault Intercessors with jump packs, an excellent unit in on the detachment to begin with, but also especially good once you can get the +1 to wound when targeting your Oath of Moment target. We have some backline shooting from 3 Ballistus Dreadnoughts. These guys obviously are a little self-sufficient. They don't necessarily need the Oath of Moment target to get hit rerolls, so they can just be firing into whatever and just be applying additional damage to your opponent's army. We have 2 Incursor squads for a little bit of support to the ranged attacks, as well as some forward operation, an Infiltrator squad to protect against deep strikers, and then some more shooting in the form of 3 Predator Destructors. We also have a Hammer Strike in there, so this kind of mid-AP shooting can get ignore cover, and a Scout squad. The Predator Destructors are very nice in the early game if that is where Oath of Moment is going, because they do have those mid-strength attacks from their autocannons and las cannons, and getting the +1 to wound on those is going to be huge. They also benefit quite nicely from the Incursor buff once the Incursors start shooting at your target in order to get the +1 on them. Now, the Incursors are interesting as well because they can be very fast if you need them to. They have an assault weapon, so you can use the stratagem inside or Liberator Assault Group to advance and charge. You don't have to battle shock them to also advance and shoot because they can just shoot naturally to apply their +1 buff. And then once they get into melee, they have a sustained hits AP1 melee weapon. So they're actually pretty good at fighting as well, especially when they get that plus attack and extra strength from the detachment ability on top. So those guys are very synergistic with this detachment in addition to their synergy with other ranged platforms in the faction. Now we're going to stick with the Winchester GT for a moment here and talk about Brett Keeble, who was playing Adeptus Mechanicus at the event. And this, as I mentioned before, is using the Halo Screed Battle Clade, the brand new Grotsmas detachment for Adeptus Mechanicus. Now, for those who haven't seen this detachment in action, it's a very cool one. It allows you to choose up to 2 units in a Strike Force game in your command phase to get a special buff that you choose to be active for all of your what are called Halo Override units. This includes things like advancing and charging innately, stealth, +2 movement, or +1 toughness, so you can make your units much faster and get into melee quicker, or you can make them much more difficult to kill, and you can choose different units every single one of your turns, and there are some ways to apply these benefits to other units as well. The list is including a Tech Priest Dominus with Sanctified Ordnance to give his unit an additional 6 inches to range. We also have a Manipulus with Cognitive Reinforcement. This allows you to apply both Conqueror and Protector imperatives for the army, so they can be both +1 weapon skill and +1 ballistic skill with both Assault and Heavy on their weapons, and potentially +1 AP on their attacks as well as a little benefit, a hit benefit in melee. So that's extremely good on especially large units like Cataphrone Breachers, which it does look like that we are taking in the army. Now, on top of that, we are going to be running 2 Techno-Archaeologi to just hold down the back line of the table and prevent enemy deep strikers from coming in. And then we have a ton, an absolute immense number of battle line units. 1, 2 units of Skitarii Rangers, 1, 2, 3 units of Skitarii Vanguard. The ability to speed these guys up allows them to not only obviously spread their battle line buffs around for the other big sort of brick units, but also play very aggressively and move up and engage enemy objectives very quickly. Because one thing that both Halo Screed and Adeptus Mechanicus in general is very good at doing is keeping your opponent off balance in terms of scoring. Now, we then also have a bunch of backline shooting. So we have an Iron Strider Ballistari unit, as well as 2 Onager Dune Crawlers. These guys are interestingly equipped with neutron lasers, so that's the big heavy anti-tank gun, as well as a bunch of smaller utility units, including a Sterilizer unit for some flamer action, a Sicarian Infiltrator unit to act as a forward operator, and 2 individual Taser Lance Sidonian Dragoons. We do have some larger shooting units as well to follow up all of that. A unit of Strider Ballistari with Cognis Las cannons for some heavy anti-tank shooting, and a Cataphrone Destroyer unit as well as a Cataphrone Breacher team. Now, the Cataphrone Breachers is typically where that Cognitive Reinforcement ends up, because those guys are both effective in shooting and in melee. One of the big downsides, however, is that they very rarely get to use themselves, get used in both capacities. Oftentimes they are either shooting or they are in melee, and they don't necessarily have the benefit of the protocols to do both at the same time. In this detachment, of course, that they do. They also love getting movement buffs or defensive buffs as well. So these things can be pretty tanky. I don't want to say they're super tough to kill, but they can be faster if they need to, especially with their assault weapons and potentially the ability to advance and charge. And they are both +1 to hit in shooting and in melee, potentially +1 AP as well from battle line units nearby, because we have a ton of battle line units in the army. The Cataphrone Destroyers are an interesting inclusion here, and these guys are often taken with that Sanctified Ordnance enhancement. That's a very cheap enhancement and gives you an additional 6 inches of range, as well as rerolls on hazardous tests. That is especially good because the Cataphren destroyers are going to be firing their plasma culverins, so the unit is typically taking a bunch of hazardous tests over the course of the game if they're overcharging, so we're firing potentially 4 2 damage, strength 8 AP3 shots apiece. Downside obviously is that you might lose some models, but the reroll on the hazardous test makes that much tougher. The big benefit here is that we can extend the range of their flamers. Each one of them is running a Cognis flamer, so the unit can be rocking range 18 flamethrower shots and improved incarnation of Fire Overwatch, since they're going to fire Overwatch on 5s with their potentially 24 plasma culverin shots, so they get a big benefit from that enhanced range as well. Very cool to see a list like this. Interesting to see very few melee units in the list, besides I guess just the infiltrators. Oftentimes we'll see a couple of Rust Stalker units to synergize with especially the advance and charge that the detachment can get built in, but didn't need it this time around. We do have those breachers to act as a counterpunch if we need them, and that certainly worked out because Brett was able to go undefeated with this list. Very cool to see Adeptus Mechanicus undefeated. It's been a little while since we've talked about them, and I'm psyched. I'm hoping that Halo Screed Battle Clade can give them a little bit more life competitively, because I think it's a faction that is generally relatively slept on. Now from there, we're going to move down to Portland, Oregon, over here in the United States, and discuss the Rose City Rampage. This was a 40-player JT, and we saw both Orks and Astra Militarum go undefeated at this one. Let's start with talking about Orks and discuss Jonathan Siebert's army. He was undefeated with an Ork War Horde, so this is the index detachment that gives the army sustained hits in melee. It's been seeing a lot more play since they got access to some more powerful ranged units, so we can get access to really, really good melee just because of Ork melee specialists, in addition to obviously all the benefits that they're going to get from War Horde. And then we can also apply those benefits to the Choppas in the ranged units as well. So it kind of smooths over all of the abilities of each of the different units included. So this includes 2 beast bosses, a shock attack gun Big Mech, Gaskell Thraka, the big man himself, a war boss, and Zodgrod Wartsnaga. We had 2 units of Beast Snaga boys to attach those beast bosses into, as well as 3 trucks, a battle wagon, a unit of Breakaboys, 1 big unit of Flash Gits, so we're adding a little bit of shooting into the army already, a unit of 20 Gretchen to attach the Zodgrod Wartsnaga into, so that's going to give the army a lot of midboard presence, be able to fight especially enemy screens and keep them pushed back thanks to Zodgrod's movement amps and his buffs to the unit. And then we have a unit of 3 Meganobs to attach Gaskell Thraka into, 3 units of Storm Boys for utility, and a Tank Buster unit to jump the Big Mech into to get the +1 to hit and +1 to wound on the Big Mech's gun as well. And he also will give reroll 1s to hit to the unit, which is a nice bonus to have for those guys. So that's a little bit of additional shooting we have. The Flash Kits are already adding some anti-infantry shooting. We have some anti-tank shooting from the tank busters themselves. That keeps your opponent's head down while you can push forward with just a bunch of trucks filled with pretty smashy guys. The Breakaboys are a nice inclusion here as well. They give you some more anti-tank options in melee, especially when they're getting that sustained hits from the army ability or from the detachment ability. They go really crazy, and we have a war boss to attach into them to give them +1 to hit on top of that too. So those guys are gonna do some serious damage. I have a whole video about exactly how much damage these guys will do on the WOG turn, and oh boy, it's a lot is the answer. Now with that, let's move over to Astra Militarum. At the same event, Tom Martin went undefeated with the Imperial Guard, and this was running a combined regiment. Now, it doesn't seem to me that we are running the new Militarum Codex. The Munitorum has been released for that, but I think that a lot of events have not yet fully adopted it. So it looks like this is still going to be using the old rules. That said, a lot of the rules are staying relatively the same for Militarum. There are some changes, and a lot of combos have sort of like swapped positions, but still remain in the Codex, so we will discuss this one momentarily. Now, Combined Regiment is being reimagined, I guess, as the Combined Arms detachment that is focused on both infantry and vehicles in the new Codex. However, in the Index, it's a little bit more, I guess, broadly focused. However, it does give that lethal hits to infantry when fighting other infantry and vehicles when fighting other vehicles. We have Gaunt's Ghost in this list, a platoon commander, as well as 2 tank commanders. One of them has Grand Strategist, so we can issue some additional squadron orders. We also have Ursula Creed in here as well. She can jump into that platoon command squad, and you make use of their Master Vox. So we have some long-range infantry orders on top of that. So we are really kind of embracing this cross-pollination of different orders that the detachment is going to be sort of moving into using. We have 2 units of Catachin Jungle jungle fighters, as well as 2 standard infantry squads. One of those is likely to attach the platoon command squad to unlock the Master Box combo for Ursula Creed. We have 3 standard Tauroxes. These are not the Taurox Primes, they're just the light transport vehicles. Just 65 points for a dedicated transport is a steal, although they are much easier to kill than most dedicated transports in the game. We have a mortar heavy weapon squad, so we can provide fields of fire to our units for +1 AP, 2 Hellhounds to strip cover from enemies, and a couple Leman Russ. 1 Leman Russ battle tank and 1 Leman Russ exterminator. The battle tank is usually kind of the recipient of the buffs. He's kind of the end of the buff chain. We can give him +1 to hit from a tank commander, +1 AP from overlapping fields, shoot the Leman Russ exterminator at his target for +1 AP as well, shoot a Hellhound at the target to strip cover, and then the Leman Russ becomes AP3, likely lethal hits, hit rerolls if their target is on an objective, and ignore cover, so almost the equivalent of AP4, and will probably shoot down whatever it is that we're looking at. This guy is equipped with plasma cannons, interestingly, whereas the exterminator has multi-meltas, which means that he's looking to make use of the blast on his battle cannon a little bit more often, and he's ready to play a longer ranged game. You oftentimes take the plasma cannons on the tanks that you are expecting not to get too close to your opponent, because once they're engaged, those plasma cannons become much less useful. So these guys are going to be engaging at that 36-inch-ish range. We also then have a unit of Scout Sentinels to add some additional rerolls to the army and some forward operation, as well as a Tempestus Scion unit for utility. Pretty interesting list. I really like that this is a little different than the standard builds for combined regiment that we see. It is very much a combined arms style. We have the Leman Russ as well as the Hellhounds, but they are backing up a bunch of infantry, right? 4 infantry squads, those guys inside armored vehicles, and we do have a bunch of orders available for them from Ursula Creed. So while we are focusing on tanks for our damage, we have a lot of board control with those infantry, which is really nice to see. Especially no Lord Soleatus in this list either, so we are leaving that guy at home. Now with that, we're going to move back to the United Kingdom and discuss the Hive City Gaming GT. This is a much smaller GT, only 24 players, but it was won by someone who you might recognize if you've watched the channel for a while, Sergeant Crusader Ed, who is actually a member of the TacticalTortoise Discord and has played a lot of games on my stream, especially on Tabletop Simulator. He took the event down with World Eaters. Now, his list was relatively standard. This included Angron Lord Invocatus, 2 units of Jackals for some obsec and utility, as well as a ton of 8-bound. 1 unit of 6 8-bound, 2 units of 3 8-bound, 2 units of 3 Exalted 8-bound, a Chaos Spawn, a Forge Fiend, and interestingly, a Heldrake. Now, it's been a while since we've discussed the World Eaters Heldrake on the channel, but it's not the first time that we've actually seen it do well in competitive play. The interesting thing about these guys is that they are aircraft, but they are melee-focused aircraft, which makes them kind of inconsistent. That said, we can put this thing in hover mode. It does have the hover ability, so it's able to act as a standard vehicle with move 20 and fly. We can buff that with all of the World Eaters bonuses to movement, so we can actually shove this guy up to advancing and charging with additional movement bonuses if we really need to. So we have what is potentially a 20-inch moving vehicle that can really get up close and personal with our opponent, and they have a middling melee profile, but +1 strength and +1 attack from the detachment ability for Berserker Warband, which is what we're playing in this time around, is actually going to be a really, really big deal for this guy. The other benefit that he can get is rerolls near Angron as well. He's a unit that, unlike many other units inside World Eaters, it can actually keep up with Angron in terms of speed. So if you are sort of forcing Angron down your opponent's throat, you can actually sort of combo attack him alongside the Heldrake. In addition to that, the Heldrake has anti-flight 2+ and devastating wounds. So in a little bit of a metagame consideration, if you need to be killing flying vehicles, the Heldrake is excellent at doing it because you're likely to get somewhere around 10 mortal wounds onto a flying target. So he's good at punching through big units of jump pack intercessors, for example. He should just kill 5 jump pack Space Marines right off the bat. He is pretty good at putting damage on flying vehicles, so you can expect things like sort of Tau battlesuits, Necron, Doomsday Arcs, all that kind of stuff that incidentally has fly is going to take a ton of additional damage from this Heldrake. Now, he is a little bit of trouble punching all the way through those targets. We do have this Forge Fiend in the detachment as well, or in the army as well, so we can potentially knock them down a couple of wounds and then hit them with the Heldrake and actually kill them. So the combination of the two demon engines can actually do some serious damage. But the fact that we have a extremely fast-moving model that can keep up with Angron and also is useful in these very specific situations is really, really cool. He also has the ability to deal some mortal wounds on top of that to everything he moves over whenever he does a normal move, and we're rocking a Bale Flamer on this guy, so we have a 2 damage torrent with Ignore Cover on that profile as well. Really, really cool to see the World Eater's Heldrake here. Obviously, we typically see the mass 8-bound and all of the aggressive play from these guys alongside Lord Invocatus, so that's nothing new, but also including that alongside some really fast vehicles is really sweet. Now with that, we're going to move back over to the United States in Rochester, Minnesota for the CastleCon 40k tournament. This was a 5-round 32-player tournament that was held at the CastleCon convention, and this one was won by Adeptus Custodes. Nicholas Bielek was running our Golden Boys this time around using a Talons of the Emperor detachment. Obviously, we are coming off the back of Folger Pyle taking down the World Championships with Talons of the Emperor, so this is not super surprising. That was just a couple months ago, although it feels like it was a lifetime ago, given the how much has changed in the game since we saw that event go down in November. But obviously, Talons of the Emperor is a great detachment, a huge toolbox for Custodes units, and gives you a lot of play into a variety of matchups, whereas it doesn't have necessarily the damage output of a detachment like a shield host, and it doesn't have the vehicle focus like Solar Spearhead. It does instead have a bunch of skirmishing effects that you can use sort of over the course of the game. This is including 2 Blade Champions as well as, interestingly, a Shield Captain on Dawn Eagle Jetbike. This guy is running the Aegis Protector enhancement, which allows you to zero out incoming damage for the bearer's unit once per turn, which is incredibly powerful defensive mechanic. We have an Anathema Psychona Rhino. This thing is going to turn on a lot of your Anathema Psychona synergies within the detachment, since it will provide you that Feel No Pain against Psychic and Mortal Wounds, as well as allowing you to target it in addition to a lot of proper Custodes units with a lot of the stratagems. We then have some anti-tank from 2 Arachnus Heavy Blaze Cannon Caladius Grav tanks. We have 2 units of Custodian Wardens to attach those Blade Champions into and advance those guys up the table, a unit of Prosecutors, and 2 units of Witch Seekers for utility, and then the pièce de résistance here is 2 units of Vertus Praetors. Now, the Vertus Praetors are going to be super powerful in this detachment. They can, for example, use the reactive move, the Taloned Pincer from the detachment to protect themselves. If we are also discussing the unit that is likely to have the Dawn Eagle Jetbike Shield Captain in it, these guys can use his once per game normal move after fighting in the fight phase to get themselves out of combat. Then if your opponent tries to get them, they will not only have a damage shrug, so incidental shooting will likely not do anything to them, then also, that's thanks to the enhancement that we just discussed, then also have that reactive move if your opponent tries to get up close and personal to keep themselves even farther out of danger. Now, these guys are equipped with salvo launchers. There are some offensive buffs in the detachment, but they don't really synergize too well with the Vertus Praetors. Talons Interlocked is a shooting buff for infantry units. Unfortunately, the Vertus Praetors are not infantry, so they're not going to get that. And Emperor's Executioners gives you +1 to wound if your target is below starting strength, although these guys have lance, so oftentimes they are +1 to wound anyway. Although if you are engaged in the fight already, you can maybe get +1 to wound on your opponent's turn. However, they do get the opportunity to fall back, shoot, and charge thanks to Hunt as 1, which is going to be a big benefit to these guys, especially since they have strong both melee attacks and ranged attacks. So getting all of those on target every single turn is going to be huge. So super cool to see Vertus Praetor seeing some play after their recent December glow up, now that the unit is actually playable and not really an absolute dumpster fire, but they do represent some really, really powerful damage. It's interesting to see them inside this detachment. I know there is some very strong defensive play that you can use with them, but it does feel like they are losing a little bit of offensive output compared to some of the other detachments, but that is maybe not the case. That's not really why we're playing Talons of the Emperor in general. And getting things like fallback and shoot and charge and reactive moves does synergize very well with these fast skirmishing units like these Dawn Eagle Jetbike units. So it does make sense that we would play them here. And with that, those are all of the best armies in Warhammer 40k for this week. Thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. Let me know which one down in the comment section is your favorite. You can support me and all the content that I make either over on Patreon at patreon.com/TacticalTortoise. YouTube channel members, you can join in the video link in the video description, or by by subscribing to me over on Twitch. Twitch subscribers will get immediate access to all of my live stream VODs, so if you want to see any of the games that I live stream instantaneously, you can go help me out over there. Otherwise, you do get early access to videos and some custom content if you join at the different tiers, either in my YouTube channel membership or my Patreon. And I really appreciate all the people who support me on those platforms. It really helps me keep the lights on. And thanks to everybody who supports me. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.